Welcome to this training session brought to you by the Society of American Archivists, Archivist of Religious Collections section. My name is Jonathan Lawler. Now I'll give the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional lands of many Indigenous nations. We know that Indigenous peoples have suffered from historical and ongoing injustices and understand as an archival organization that we must work towards sharing historical truths and renew respectful relationships with Indigenous communities. We respect the long-standing relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land as the original caretakers. We are grateful for their stewardship and protection of the water and earth. We pay our respects to elders past and present. Today's topic is the Ancestry Digitization Program. Before I introduce our presenter, let's review the disclaimer. The content in these presentations is for information only and is not legal advice. Our views do not represent the organizations where we work. We do not make any endorsements or guarantees. We are not liable for any loss or damage caused by your use of the content we provide. It is your responsibility to critically evaluate the content provided in the presentation and any accompanying material. Also, please remember the points shown on this slide. You will not be able to use your microphone or video during this session. You can click on the closed captioning button at the bottom of your screen, and under Live Transcript, click Enable Auto Transcription to get closed captioning. There will be a question period after the presentation concludes. You should use the Q&A feature to ask your questions. We will not answer questions in the chat or unmute attendees due to time constraints. Please be respectful in your interactions. We expect you to follow the SAA Code of Conduct. This session will be recorded, and we ask that you please fill out the short survey after the session ends. We encourage you to join the Society of American Archivists if you are not a member. We thank the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph in Canada for hosting this webinar. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Jared Akenhead. Jared Akenhead has worked for the last 12 years at Ancestry and is currently the Senior Content Acquisition Manager. Jared has spent a number of years in the US and Canadian markets, working with local and national archives, individual and corporate record repositories, and societies of all shapes and sizes. He has been successful in developing partnerships with many nonprofit and government organizations. Born in England, Jared was raised in Southern Africa and eventually immigrated to Australia. He attended university in the US and now lives in Utah with his wife and their 5 children and 5 grandchildren. Jared loves the outdoors and enjoys jeeping in the many parks around Utah. Thank you for presenting today, Jared.
Thank you, Jonathan. Let me just get to my slides here and we can get things kicked off. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us here, and I appreciate SAA and also Mary for giving us the opportunity to kind of share with you a little bit about what we do at Ancestry. Some of you are probably familiar with who we are, what we do, but this will kind of encapsulate some of my position, what I do, a little bit about the company, and then some of the processes that we go through to digitize content. I'm familiar with SAA and have attended their conferences many times. May have met some of you in that, and if you're attending in, I think it's Detroit this year, maybe. I look forward to seeing some of you there. I've made this, some of the information on these slides is kind of towards the Canadian market a little bit. I spend quite a bit of time up there, but what I present is equally applicable to the market in the US and other locations around the world. I was up a number of years ago working with Pier 21 in Halifax and came across this quote and thought it was a great intro to how immigration should be viewed and was viewed back in the 1900s as someone who came from, I think, Netherlands. I'll share that with you here. And this is by George from the Netherlands, 1951. And he says, I got a letter from my brother, and he wrote, George, he said, you're coming to Canada. Canada is a land of overflowing milk and honey, but you have to find your own cows and bees. Very typical of that era, I think, of how people viewed their immigration, and there was still a lot of work to do. And I'm thankful to be able to work in Canada. I know there's a lot of cows and bees, but there's a lot of milk and honey that comes from that as well. And so we're happy to be working in Canada and to acquire content there. And I'll go into some of that in a little more detail here. My next slide is kind of an overview, I think, of Ancestry as a company and kind of where we're at. And here are some numbers that I'll throw out to you and give you some explanation on as we move through this. So who we are. We obviously are a genealogy, family history, web-based company. We have 60 billion records online now, and we published more than 1 billion last year alone. So we're progressing in the right direction. We have over 25 million people in the world's largest consumer DNA network, which some of you may be familiar with. We have a DNA product as well, and that's driving a lot of interest in not only DNA, but also in our family history business, which is the core business that we operate in. We're available now in more than 60 markets globally. We have records from around 88 countries of origin. 13 plus billion ancestral profiles. We handle over 1 billion searches a month. And we have over 1 billion user-generated documents. Those are documents that our user base upload and share with themselves, stories, photos, other documentations as well. We are a for-profit company, and most of you are probably familiar with that. We have over 3 million subscribers right now and over 131 million family trees. And those are the trees people create when they come onto Ancestry as a way to capture and present information about their family trees. And we have 9 global offices around the world, including obviously our headquarters in Utah. We have offices in San Francisco, Toronto, Australia, UK, Ireland, Germany. I think I get most of those, but we're a global company. And we have over 1,400 employees across those, ranging from people that do what I do in the content world, to developers, to marketing, legal, and a whole array of other jobs and work fronts here. Our mission at Ancestry is fairly simple. We empower journeys of personal discovery to enrich lives. And that's a mission statement that was developed a few years ago that encompasses, I think, a lot of why we do what we do. And so that's something that we're fairly passionate about. And what we do. So we provide an online source for rich genealogical content to be searched, and some of this may be familiar with some of you here. And I guess before I go too much further on this slide, as a company, we've been around for more than 30 years, I think. And as the internet became more of a common factor in people's lives, it changed the landscape of how people do their genealogy, right? And some of you are maybe genealogists and may understand the processes that people had to go through prior to the internet being around. And most of that was engaging through written correspondence, through personal travel to different archives or cemeteries. There was a lot involved in doing your family history research. As the internet developed, companies like ourselves, I guess, saw the opportunity to help facilitate family history research by aggregating records in one place that enabled people to find these rich documents without having to travel, without having to go through the costs and time to find these records. So, like I said, we provide an online source for these rich genealogical contents, this content to be searched. We also create communities where users can collaborate and share on our platform. Through collaborating with other users and messaging people, and communicating to those who may be a part of their family lines, or just in general, as they try to unravel their own personal histories. There's aspects of our website that can be made private and also made public, and the users have the ability to decide how public or how much engagement they would like to have or present as public information, where other people can identify content that they've created themselves. But that's something we're very cognizant of. Privacy is a big issue for the work that we do, and we have a big responsibility in keeping people's information private if that's what they want. We also have obviously some unique algorithms that assist people in their searching on our site. As people put in some general information about what they're searching for, the algorithms in the background do a lot of searching for names, derivatives, documentations that might be associated with their search. And we provide this information to the users in the form of what we call hints, or shaky leaves, it used to be called. And as you find someone and you do some information, the algorithms present the users with some possibilities of documents and information related to that person. And then it's up to the user to identify whether that's the right person or not. And it gives you some derivatives of dates, perhaps, or spellings of names that could have changed over time. So that's one of the big things that help. But we always ask people to kind of verify what they do, and to not trust everything, to make sure that they verify and can confirm these details that they eventually attach to their trees. And then we also, obviously, I've spoken a little bit about the creation of trees, and this is all in our family history product, not DNA product just yet, but there is some crossover. But we provide the ability to create family trees and store invaluable family information. So some of you may be familiar, but those are not who may not be. One of the main function is to go onto Ancestry and start building your family tree. And you start with what you know, and then, like I said, these algorithms and other personal searching can help start building that tree and spreading those leaves out and those branches. And those are the trees that then also become searchable if you've made that tree public. And again, you can make it private if you just want to keep it within your circle of family, etc. And then obviously the DNA product that is in conjunction with Family Search in some ways is a big part of what we've done over the last few years. And like some of the statistics earlier, we now have I think it is the largest consumer genomics database. And what that does, it facilitates the discoveries through your DNA that provide insights into ethnicity, but more importantly, through living relatives as well. And there's a number of programs that we've sponsored that help that use this technology to find relatives. And one of the ones comes to mind, I think it was called Long Lost Family, around adoptions and things like that. So the DNA product is a fascinating development, continues to grow and expand. And again, we're very cognizant of the responsibilities we have as a company to keep data private and secure. And so that's a big element of those 1,400 employees. Part of those deal with privacy and data protection. And again, your DNA can be made private, can be destroyed. There's a lot of terms and conditions that are on our site that help explain those things in more detail. But it's a wonderful tool to use in genealogy to help break down walls or connect with living people who may be searching or working on similar lines as what you are. So I mentioned earlier, we are the world's largest collection of digitized historical content. We partner with many organizations around the world. Like I said, we've been doing this for more than 30 years and spent, at least in our digitizing and indexing efforts, over $500 million in those years. There's other parts of our company, but I work in the content department, which is the department that overlooks the acquisition, digitizing, indexing, and publishing of content to our site. And these are just a few of the organizations, the institutions that we work with. And on the right, you can see this is not an exhaustive list, but it's certainly a list that includes some of the main record types. And we're always expanding that list, finding new ways to present information that might be helpful to fill in the stories between a birth, a marriage, and a death that are so rich and can give a lot of people context. Church records are one of our main focuses, as well as we continue to provide details around burials, christenings, and marriages that were often, as we know, prior to the development of the Department of Health and vital registers and things like that. The churches are really the only place where these important events were recorded. And so the further back we go, we understand that those relationships are important, and we navigate through a number of different religious entities to present what we do as a way to help digitize, preserve the records that are so valuable in these areas, and that can help bring families closer to the relatives that were part of that religious institution at some point, or may continue to be as well. But yeah, there's a lot of different entities we work with, a lot of which are government related. You'll notice here on this slide that there's a number of national organizations, including National Archives of the US, LAC in Canada, TNA in the UK, and many others. And really, it's the content. I mentioned I work with the content team, right? And it's really the content team, as we go back to our mission statement, help people making these discoveries. And this is where it comes from. The collections we provide that have these rich stories, this rich details, information that can help build these trees and fill in these, like I said, the details between in a life event of a marriage or a birth and a death, and gives light and insight. And that's what we try to do, right? To connect people to their past. That enriches their lives, and the enrichment comes from the content that we try to surface to our user base to help them connect more closely to where they come from and what life was like and what their relatives did. And there's many different storytelling content types that can help facilitate that. And so we strive, outside of the major census and birth, marriage, and deaths, to acquire the content that can give that richness to the stories and to the people who are in them. And here are just a few things. These documents are amazing documents, and I'm sure a lot of you understand some of the richness of the content that you may overlook or have access to, or the valuable insights that can be gained through this. And again, it's all about connecting people to the past and helping them enrich their lives to understand, more about their families. I put this slide in here as an example of some of the work we do and some of the usage, I guess, on Ancestry for some of the Canadian entities that we have content from. This applies to just, I think, all of the US states as well, where we have a relationship with at the state archive level. And we provide usage statistics for those entities so that they can understand some of the usage that their collections are getting on Ancestry. And that's not just from a Canadian market or a US market, it's the usage worldwide, right? Depending on where our user base is, which is worldwide. Those users over in Asia, in Australia, in Africa, whoever they may be, have access to the content from these provincial archives and from the state archives and from all the other entities we work with. But as an example, I'll mention here that a page view is a combination of either an image or an index. So whenever someone clicks on an image or clicks on views an index from any collection, we capture that piece of information and we present it as usage statistics for that entity. So LAC, the Library and Archives of Canada, for example, on a daily basis, they get over 100,000 page views a day on the collections that we have attributed to LAC. All right, so these are just LAC collections. And in a month, that's over 3 million in a month. So it's a fairly significant statistic that a lot of entities find helpful as, as more interest goes to online traffic and access. And to be able to quantify some of that is certainly helpful in a lot of cases. We can again go down each one of these lines to the province in Canada and identify, depending on the number of collections we have that we've attributed to that provincial archive. Sorry, there are many other entities that we have stats for, but British Columbia, I think most of these are around the vitals statistics that we have that are index-based at this time. I know there's images around that, but not on Ancestry at this point. So you can see it's quite these are quite significant numbers on a daily basis and over a month. And we present an interface to our partners, whereby they can have access to all of this information and present it to those folks that are interested in how information is shared and used on Ancestry. So it's a great tool that we present to most of our large partners. Sorry, I'm just going to hope it's done. Okay. So again, the Canadian census, and this is how some of the records are utilized. So I've got a couple of little presentations here. I'll be quick, not too long, these videos, and then I'll get into some details about the actual digitization process. But this is an example from the recently released, almost coming up to a year now. It's been, well, time goes quickly, but it was released last June. And the work that we did with LAC and Family Search. But this is an example, I think, of what those records mean, and this one and the next one. So let's see if this works.
Explore the 1931 Canada Census, and you could discover that it's because of your grandmother's perseverance, working as a dressmaker, that you are here today. Uncover more of your family story on Ancestry.ca.
Make new discoveries within the 1931 Census of Canada with Ancestry as your guide. This may also be the first time your own parents or grandparents were officially documented in the national census as children. You can see the impact the Great Depression may have had on your relatives by exploring whether they were unemployed in 1931. The census data also reveals details like the number of rooms occupied in homes, shedding light on the size and living conditions of households. If they had moved homes since the last census, was this potentially through hardship? Uncover the answer to the newest census question to find out whether your family owned a radio during its golden age, as well as how many months of the year your ancestors attended school. If your relatives were immigrants to Canada, the census provides valuable information, such as their year of immigration and naturalization, as well as the languages they spoke, and what nationality and racial origin they claimed. You may learn of names and relationships to people that you never knew were in your family. A simple name from the census may jog memories of neighboring families your parents grew up with, connecting you to countless family stories. Who knows what you'll find? While the newly released 1931 Census of Canada provides a fascinating snapshot of your relatives' lives, there's often more to the story. Craft your online family tree on Ancestry using the census as an excellent foundation. To build your tree on Ancestry, start with what you know about your family history. Ask living relatives about family stories, names, and places. Gather photos, and then add this information to your online family tree. To locate family members in the census, enter the name of a relative born before 1931. Any additional information you may already know will help, such as birth year, birthplace, parents' names, and place of residence. The more details you can add, the more chance you have of finding connections and stories within the census. When you have found your family in the census, save the record to your tree. The more Ancestry records you attach, the easier it is for Ancestry to connect you to your ancestors. Embark on your journey through the 1931 Census of Canada on Ancestry and discover your family story.
Again, just a wonderful example of kind of why it is we do what we do as a company. And I think, I have one of the best jobs in helping people make these discoveries. And obviously censuses are great. They've got a lot of information, but there's so many other content types with rich information that can be just as impactful, as people make these discoveries and learn more about their past. That can really affect who they are and come to know their lives a little in more detail. So the next slide goes into a little bit of the process that we do, right? I mentioned I work with the content acquisition team, and part of what we do is we there's a slide coming up. I may have it in the wrong order, but part of what we do is identify content that is available out there, and we work with institutions to digitize that content, and we do that through both on-site and off-site digitization, which means we'll set up our operation on location where a lot of these records are stored. Obviously, because of the nature of these records, a lot of them can't be sent to our facilities, mostly in Utah, but others in UK and stuff. And so we have on-site operations, and this is kind of an overview of what that looks like as well. So we work with organizations to coordinate conservation and digitization of documents. There's a small footprint that has a minimal impact, and you can see an example of that in the image there. We work with the institutions around any customization of the treatment of all these record sets. You can imagine there's quite a variety that we come across, and so we work with those institutions in creating a custom treatment plan for each record set. And obviously we use, the best technology available for us, and we have national and international standards that we adhere to, both in how we capture things and through technical requirements, as well as handling procedures. And then we also work with those institutions to see if there are any particular specific rules, regulations that they'd like us to adhere to that may be unique for their institutions as well. Our typical standard of imaging is at 300 DPI. It's a fairly standard national DPI that we adhere to. We have capabilities of going bigger on those at some point, depending on the size of those documents and what we're trying to accomplish. And then we work with a lot of different formats, obviously, with paper, microfilm, and fiche. If it's digital, that's easily transferred and worked on, although we don't need to digitize it if it comes to that. But our standard operating workhorse is the planetary kind of overhead camera operation with the lights, as you can see in both those images. And we set this up on site and at the partner. And they provide us the space and maybe a desk, and then we provide the equipment that we ship in, and we work with we hire and train local individuals to operate that, and they're overlooked by our remote scanning manager. As an example here in our remote domestic operations, there's somewhere upwards of 75 sites, and we do about 20 million images a year. From what I understand, one camera operator under normal conditions, we tend to expect somewhere around 10,000 images a week to be scanned. And we have anywhere from 20 to 70 contractors across America and Canada who we utilize in this work. We do also occasionally have our full-time staff working on projects, depending on proximity and availability as well. And again, you know, the technologies we use, some are proprietary in the software we use, but most of it is around the camera operators, the sheet feeders, and the microfilm scanners, and so forth. And I know I've spoken a little bit about acquisition, and that's the world I live in. And essentially what I do is identify relevant information, collections at different repositories. We negotiate contracts to digitize and provide access to the content in return for our ability to publish that content on our platform. The services for digitization are at no cost to our partners, and we recoup our investment through our ability to publish the content to our subscriber base. It's as simple as that. So all of the equipment, the hiring, and everything like that is all the costs for that are borne by Ancestry, and you know, that can be a one person for a month, or it could be 20 people for 2 years or more. We have the full gamut. We work with you know, we've worked in the past with LAC, with NARA in the US, setting up operations for large projects as well as small projects as well. But again, all of those costs are borne by Ancestry, and we try minimize anything, any work that is required by our partners we work with, other than providing a space and maybe a table and chair, and then access to the documents and helping provide a way to retrieve those documents back and forth. So I wouldn't say there's zero cost, because there's probably some administrative cost to help facilitate some of that. But for the most part, that's how we work in our acquisition and contracts. And here's some of the ways some of the things we come across, which may be unfortunately familiar to some of you. We see these things quite often, but we also see the other side of things. These are probably the negative examples, but we see some wonderful examples as well. But I thought these would be interesting to some of you, as we some of the places that we've had to go to retrieve and work with different organizations. I'm sure none of you are like this, but there have been. And again, we've worked with some amazing institutions who have great content. So just briefly, in closing here, there's what we call the Canadian Grant Program. And this is a program that's specific to Australia, New Zealand, and to Canada at this time. We don't have a grant program per se in the US, but the way we approach things in the US is very similar. This is just a program that we're targeting some of our Canadian content users with, and it's just a way for them to apply for a grant to help them with digitization. And again, this could be applicable, although we don't frame it as a grant program, can certainly be applicable in the US as we engage with different institutions. But as an example, for the Canadian Grant Program, we have 3 different areas of levels, if you will, of value of digitization. And it's a way for individuals to apply for a grant. And the grant is provided in digitization value, if that makes sense. We have to ensure that we're not writing checks, unfortunately, but we'll do the work, and the value is coordinated with Ancestry, and is usually associated with how we envision those expenses to be, which are well below commercial values in most cases. So there are different programs here that we do, and can service different content types. A typical contract, and again, this is for the grant program, but these certainly apply equally to other contracts we work with, right? And there's questions related to the contract and what that looks like essentially. But we provide back to our partners that high quality digital images, the collection in J2K, JPEG, TIFFs, or whatever the preferred outcomes might be. The partners keep ownership of the digital images that we create, so the images will always be yours. We have, in this case, a 5-year. We provide our partners with 5 years of Ancestry access, and that's not just to their records. That's the Ancestry platform that we provide for 5 years to the individual partners, so that they can view their records, but also use Ancestry as on site. And then what we try to do is limit the distribution or the access, mostly from outside the organization, right? As I mentioned before, our realization of our investment return is through having it up on our site. And we try to protect that and have some sort of exclusivity. So we want our partners to be able to utilize the content in their normal course of business, and to continue providing the same services they had in a more efficient manner. And we don't want to stop that. What this distribution asks for is that there's no like online display and availability for outside of your organization, at least for some time, in an effort for us to recoup some of those costs. And so that's typically what we ask for in return for those, for that thing. But again, we try to do this in a way that our partners see value and can continue providing services and have access to all of this information. And it's important to understand as well that yes, we're a subscription company and people pay to access all those services I mentioned earlier, right? But the content is always available as it was prior to us engaging with that entity, right? So we don't and can't restrict anything you've done before. All we do is provide you with additional digital content that you can utilize to enhance and make fulfillments more efficient, to help preserve content in digital formats. And again, you own that. We don't claim ownership in those digital images, and want you to be able to see that benefit and realize that in your daily things. So again, this applies to most of the contracts we typically do. There's a lot of other things in contracts, obviously, otherwise I'd be a happy person with a one-page contract, but contracts are usually lengthier than that. And so there are things relating to terms and other licenses and other legal aspects. But those are the big questions I get asked a lot around kind of ownership and what we can do with the content that we provide back. And in generally that speaking, but yeah, I know this is not, I don't want this to be as big of a sales pitch, but certainly if there's a level of interest from individuals who would be interested, we're happy to share details. If you're interested in any grant program, here's my email at the end here. If you want to write it down, connect with me or pull me aside at the SAA conference. Yeah, I see there are a few questions, so I'm going to take the rest of the time. Thank you very much again, SAA and Mary and hosting, Jonathan for working on this. And certainly appreciate our connection here. I look forward to continuing our relationship and seeing where this goes. But this is the end, and there are a few questions, but if you want to write down my email, you can. happy to provide you with information. And I know this presentation is videoed as well and recorded, so feel free to engage wherever you need. I'll stop sharing my slides and let Jonathan continue doing what he does.
Well, thank you, Jared. That was a most helpful overview of Ancestry. As you had mentioned, we have a few questions, but just a reminder, if any of the attendees have questions, to please type them into the Q&A feature, and we will try our best to get to them. We should have about 15 minutes or so for question and answer. And so to get started, I just wanted to ask the first question, which is noting that as an archives, our main goal is accessibility. And so with the limits placed on distribution and access, the attendee wanted to know, like, how with considering those limits, how is it benefiting the archives world to partner with Ancestry?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It comes up quite frequently, and like I said, we try not to interfere with your daily operations of meeting your objectives as an archive, right? So most of the limitations are actually on online publishing, right? So if the content, if you don't have a website or don't intend to put content up on your platform, then there's real no concern or risks for us in terms of access, right? We ask that you don't share that with another commercial company that works in our space, but you can still facilitate sharing that with academia, with individual users, or whatever else comes your way. And then just after a period of time, 3 to 5 years is typically what we set. If you are intending to publish it, then again, we try to prevent people from crawling it, scraping it, and that stuff. But we work with those institutions to help ultimately facilitate the digitization and providing the access through the regular means. And if they can wait a few years to be able to do that online, then they can realize the benefit of having a digital product in their holdings.
Thank you. And does Ancestry hold usage rights to use the content in the subscription service for a set time or indefinitely?
Most of the contracts we have are our rights to publish the content are in perpetuity. And we do that because of the nature of our user engagement and how they utilize and save content and material to their trees and share it. To have a limit on that would kind of go against people's ability to have that information and be able to share it in a way that's that they have to comply with our terms and conditions. So the license to publish the content on our site is typically in perpetuity because of those reasons, mostly.
So we have a question here about the profits that Ancestry makes, off of the use of archival material, the digitization, and providing access to the digitization.
Yep.
One attendee had expressed concern with this and said that there was a disparity between what Ancestry earns from the decades of work archives have done that makes Ancestry's huge profits available, and then saying that the returns to the archives in like the grant programs that you had cited seem to be small in comparison. And so they asked, will Ancestry consider a much more equitable share of profits with archives?
Interesting question. I appreciate the question about that. I don't know too much about the financial aspects and how they operate financially. The approach that we make with archives is typically around content that they have that they don't have the funds for in terms of digitizing. If they do have those funds and they're happy to continue operating under their own finances to support their digitizing, then there's not a match up, right? But most of the times we engage with archives is because, you know, budgets are stretched, and we'll come in and provide that. In terms of additional return, I don't want to say there's never any considerations for that, because occasionally there is. But most of the institutions we work with, big and small, realize the benefit of the returns we provide, and are happy to work under those conditions. Yeah, we are a commercial company who have goals around profit and other things, right? And the investments that we make from those profits, give you an example around handwriting recognition, right? And all these other things, we do invest a lot back into the company in ways that will help facilitate more and more technologies and making things more accessible and easier and faster. But in terms of the returns to the archives, typically what I've seen is the return of the access of Ancestry and the free digitizations. Most of the archives I work with are more than happy to have those, right? And even realizing that, yes, we're a commercial company that makes money, and I see a lot of that. Like you said, we've invested over, you know, $500 million in these relationships and digitizing in content that would otherwise not be digitized for the most part. And so we see that as a great plus. And again, if an archive doesn't see that value, and that's where I have to come in, and we have to find a mutual agreement to this, or a mutual benefit. And if that benefit is not equal in some ways, we try to get there, but in some cases we don't, and we understand that. And it's you know, that's we just won't be able to engage at some level. But I said that's the norm. There are a few exceptions to that occasionally, and those are related around large institutions who have a lot of content, where we can provide things like royalties to who continue to do that. But it's an exception more than the rule, and it's usually based around the amount of value that we both see in that relationship. But I appreciate the question. I know, I understand it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your response. So you had mentioned handwriting recognition in your answer to that question, and we do have a question here related to that. So how do you manage accuracy regarding handwriting recognition?
Another great question. So we're just scratching the surface a little bit of handwriting recognition, right? There's a lot of out-of-the-box solutions that we've kicked the tires to, ultimately developed our own handwriting recognition technology that meets the needs of what we have, right? That gives us the value, and the we can manage things a little bit more. But in terms of accuracy, that is one of the big questions around handwriting recognition, right? As we continue to develop that. At this point, you know, as an example of we did this I think we ran it first on the 1950 US Census, and we've done some French BMDs and census work with our handwriting. And then obviously last year we did the 1931 census. And the first pass we did with our handwriting recognition was very promising in terms of our accuracy. I think there was 12 to 14 fields that met and exceeded our expectations in having at least 90% accuracy on some of those fields. But at this point, we still do verification, human verification on some of that, but it helps facilitate the speed of everything. Our partners at Family Search helped facilitate a lot of that verification work. And it just depends on the types of documents, right? And the languages. We struggled with certain aspects of the 1931 census because of the accents with French and other things, and little dots kind of put things off. So it's a continuing training that we apply. It's a learning process, right? And we're using the results of what we do to help continue to develop those products, and then look at other content sets where we have to retrain on different content types. But when it's form-based, or we like to say form-based content, like a census is, that's where we're starting with, right? And the next phase would be into paragraph-based handwriting recognition, where it reads paragraphs and can spit out, the content from that. But yes, certainly accuracy is a big component of the success of handwriting recognition. But at this point, we're very optimistic about the results that we've had. But we'll continue to verify content results when needed.
Thanks. And a related question,
Mhm.
is there an option to correct or note a difference in name? Because names were, often spelled incorrectly in records.
Yeah.
So could a user go in and, if they notice a discrepancy,
Yep.
suggest a change?
The short answer, yes, you can. On the website, there are user entries that you can go in and say, again, your correction doesn't override the original, but it becomes a part of the search results as well, right? So that you can help facilitate other searches. And because you may have some great personal insights into what that name should be or how it's spelt. And so, anytime there's handwriting, there's always going to be a discrepancy between you and I, and on whether it's an I that's not dotted or whether it's an E, and your insight could be helpful in do that. So we do have that mechanism on our site where people can go in and offer up alternative spellings that then become part of our search algorithms.
And you had mentioned a partnership with Family Search a couple of times, and I believe in relation to the 1931 Canadian census. And one of our attendees would just like you to describe the nature of that partnership a little bit in more depth.
Sure. So if you've been around the block in the genealogy world, you will understand that Family Search, who are a religious-based organization in Utah that we often get confused with, have been around a lot longer than we have, right? And a lot longer than the internet, and they've been doing family history work for decades. They have a lot of content, a lot of it in microfilm, right? And they continue to acquire content in different ways. And we have a great relationship with them in helping to provide resources to share content in some ways, where we can help facilitate through our continued investments in digitizing microfilm or indexing projects. They rely quite heavily on volunteer organizations to do a lot of their work. And sometimes that's limiting when you're under deadlines or you want to get something done quickly. And so we actually have meetings with them weekly, and they've been great partners of ours as we continue to work on projects together or share content in some ways. But at the end of the day, we're two different organizations with different missions, and ultimately we do separate, and we're a competitive environment, but for the most part, we're great partners with Family Search because of those reasons, and it's a mutual thing with them as well. We provide access to Ancestry to most of the memberships and other things like that. So it's a mutually benefit relationship, as most relationships should be, and they've been a great partner. So in the 31 census, we worked with them in helping us to refine the results of our handwriting recognition. They sent it through a process of theirs to help do that. And so that was one example of how we operate.
I think we have time for about one more question. So are there situations in which you would take down records?
Yeah, there is, and we do it occasionally. Sometimes for legal reasons, and sometimes because of personal requests on information. It's something that I think I think it's in our terms and conditions in some ways, but we're very careful around living people data, right? And public information. And so if there's public information, most of the time, that works for us, although we try to keep ahead of most privacy rules and regulations. And in the US, every state's very different. In Canada, all the provinces are a little different. In the UK, there's GDPR, and there's right to be forgotten laws and other things that are passed, frequently that we have to comply with and adhere to. And we try to do that. We try and take, for example, in the US, the Social Security Death Index is a public database where Social Security numbers are made public, essentially, right? Most companies like ours acquire that database. What we've done is we've taken an extra 10 years off of it to further protect those in that 10-year period. We could try to go a little further than what we're required to do. But certainly if individuals have records online that there's that they feel they don't want to have on there, then there's a process, I think, of emailing in to make that request. And for the most part, we adhere to those.
Well, Jared, thank you very much for presenting today. We appreciate it. I wanted to let our attendees know when our next Lunch and Learn session is. So that will be held on April 11th, which is a Thursday, from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And that will be with Holly Mingle from the University of Pennsylvania, covering the topic of more product, less process. So if you would, please register for that and join us next on April 11th. Hope everyone has a nice day.